So I know Justin earlier gave a great kind of background and coverage on NFTs and kind of some of the intersect with e-commerce, which is kind of what we're talking about here today. So I quickly went over kind of what I had and tried to shift out a lot of kind of what he covered. So we're not going to be too redundant here. And then shifted focus a little bit into some of the tech and really thinking about, okay, all these great gadgets, from AI to blockchain and NFTs are really cool, but can be overwhelming with some of the buzzword salad that you see in the media. And I wanted to help illustrate and help ground a little bit what the technology looks like in practice for especially you and a lot of the people that are going to be creating the near future of e-commerce and how maybe some of these nifty new tools can help towards those ends. I'm making the resources, the deck and everything available at nf.tienda, which I named the presentation because I saw that it was one of the few still available NFT referencing domains available. So I try to make things easy by creating that. So let's go. So I'm going to cover kind of a little bit how I'm structuring the talk into e-commerce, Web3, and inevitably, talking about the metaverse and thinking of these things as kind of an x-axis of tools in order to conduct commerce. And now the introduction of Web3, which creates kind of a Y commerce and how you're doing the same functions, but adding abilities to it that, takes you from a line to a square. And then obviously with the metaverse, that's a Z axis, creating 3D immersive experiences. And then looking at how, the progression of e-commerce tools can kind of paint a picture of how these early days of Web3 and the metaverse might look like, kind of looking at that as an example. So when we talk about e-commerce or commerce generally, we want to kind of break things down into what are the key components that are involved and kind of what do those look like in broad strokes. So goods and services, your merchandise, expertise if it's your time, or consulting, whatever that takes form as, the inventory. Okay, how are you keeping these things, whether it's warehouse, drop shipped, or slots on your calendar. There's a place where this inventory is kept and kept track of. What's the point of sale? So how are people accessing this, and how are you exchanging value for value? How are you marketing these goods and services, from your brand to your messaging and positioning to the channels you're using? What are the business processes kind of involved on the back end, from how you're sourcing things, pricing things, distribution, especially in 2021, supply chain landscape for kind of fulfilling e-commerce acquired goods and services. How is this staffed? Who are the people involved? What are the roles? How are they contracted? How are they being incentivized? From hourly work to basis on delivery to kind of a blend of these things. What does that look like? And then, of course, your customers and community around these goods and services and the industry in a broader sense, the way that we're engaging now. So prospecting, qualifying, closing, retaining, whether that's peers in the community, employees, or customers. So I'm going to kind of break this out into, okay, what do we have today? And what does it look like a little bit more tangibly in terms of what are the tools we're using? And then kind of widening that out into, okay, how does this line become a square, become a cube, going from Web 2 to Web 3 to the metaverse. Web 2, and I'll get more into this in a deeper sense, is kind of defined by these systems of engagement that are past Web 1, which was largely, university and research tools, dating way back. And now we have more of a consumer accessed internet, but everything is kind of managed through, enough players that you could keep count of them, very large houses that acquire a lot of these tools or create a lot of the back end for what we're doing. So on goods and services, are you managing physical warehouses? Are these being kept via a link if it's a digital good? like a song, which ultimately exists in a link, maybe in Amazon Web Services or what have you, or is it your time on your calendar, as I mentioned before? Your inventory is kept on a ledger, which again, we'll get into a little bit in kind of that buzzword that pops up a lot. So essentially, a spreadsheet is what Web 2 ledgers look like, which have the itemized names of what you're dealing with, the descriptions, the images, the SKUs. Your point of sale is you're more often than not, not building your own checkout system and partnerships with banks. You're using trusted institutional, existing banks and existing cash payment systems and credit payment systems, et cetera. For marketing, across Payzo, paid, earned, shared, and owned marketing materials, you're paying for AdWords and ad placement, display ads, for press. That's something you, outside of paid press, earning for kind of external coverage of what you're doing. You're posting socially and engaging with your community, and then you're generating unique content to attract attention, usually through creating a lot of high quality, relevant stuff to build SEO. The business processes, what are the tools you're using? So you're forming an entity in the form of an LLC, an L3C, 501c3, however you're conducting business. These are kind of specifically the tools that we're dealing with. And then how you're managing those is usually a third-party enterprise processing tool. So you're using CRMs from players like Salesforce and HubSpot, and you're using project management from Atlassian or from Trello, or which I think is part of the Atlassian family now. They keep erasing competitors through acquisition. So you're using these kind of third-party tools, and you're kind of trusting that they're keeping track of a lot of what it is you're doing, and going through some of these for entity formation, kind of long backlog, high price tag methods for creating an entity to build all this on top of. For your staff, again, you're using like specific tools. So in the US, that's a W-2 to have a full-time employee, or a 1099 to have a gig economy person engage with your system, like any kind of peer-to-peer application from Uber to DoorDash, although DoorDash is switching to a W-2 model with full-time service delivery. And then you're remunerating them with cash or equity, or a blend of those two, in a fiat currency, equity, as defined by public securities in very specific instrumentation, is kind of the present day tool that we often use. And then you're engaging with your customers and community in a few different formats: B2C, B2B. So you're selling to your consumers, you're selling to enterprise as a tool for other people's backend. You're having platforms where people can list, hey, I need this service, like Upwork or so, and that other businesses can engage with and fulfill. And then C2C or P2P, however you put it, where people are generating the content or listing their content, and other users are taking that down, and what you're providing is kind of the storefront for everybody to engage there. Briefly, I know we went into ancient history and then covered all the way through modern history, but touching more rapidly on this front in terms of the history of e-commerce, in order to kind of paint a picture of how technology has been leveraged in order to do these things, because that kind of connects out again to the Web3 and Metaverse topics, and how NFTs play into this specifically as a technology. So Michael Aldrich invented online shopping in 1979, which sounds sort of like, often you'll see patents that kind of paint very broad strokes of, hey, two people can connect using a computer to buy. This was a little bit more, in my opinion, kind of impressive for the time, in that he, as I kind of put up as a quote, he modified a domestic TV to do real-time transaction processing on a computer via telephone lines. And this was before kind of commercially available dial-up internet being used in a lot of these ways. And so he created a way specifically to do, as he was kind of terming it, teleshopping, by using kind of even the basic technology that had, existed at the time to lay some of the groundwork for, what we saw after that, which the earlier discussion kind of covered some of these timestamps, these points in history, and the players that kind of pushed the ball forward, from CompuServe kind of creating a first, outside of theory, publicly accessible internet in 1969. And by publicly, I mean it was no longer like it wasn't a DARPA project, so people could actually build on top of it. And then we saw, again, 1979, 10 years later, the inventing of electronic shopping. And then we saw Netscape as a first browser to actually find these things, Amazon a year after, all the way through to what we start to see with Alibaba for wholesaling being widely accessible outside of kind of these closer knit vendor relationships, Shopify, so that, which really kind of what we're seeing today has created the groundwork for an explosion of e-commerce being incredibly widely accessible to single operating entrepreneurs. Amazon Prime introducing the idea of kind of a membership to e-commerce experiences that provided perks in a new way. Etsy as that C2C or P2P kind of standard for e-commerce. And then 2008, notably, Bitcoin white paper published that kind of addresses some of what's attempting to be accomplished here, especially after the 1998, 20 years before, or 10 years before the creation of PayPal, which allowed for a much more accessible kind of payment processing to the small e-commerce upstart. Google Wallet, a lot of these digital payment experiences becoming easier and easier. Shoppable Instagram being notable because you have these more immersive, integrated, social, tappable experiences that kind of provide easier and easier access to a point of sale outside of very top-down, search-initiated shopping experiences on the internet. And then for horrendous reasons, we have seen an explosion of e-commerce for almost every good and service you need in your life, given kind of the global shutdown of brick and mortar experiences with COVID-19. Now, I kind of cover what a lot of those kind of hallmarks represent in terms of establishing the internet, web catalogs, browsers, last mile logistics, direct-to-consumer experiences, digital ads with AdSense, web point of sales, subscription, social integrated experiences, and kind of all of this being built up, all this to say, to underlining this x-axis as we're framing it, being established over 50 years. Now, the difference of, where we are today and where we're going next in terms of addressing the daunting 50 years before we get to something as convenient, relatively speaking, as we see today, is what we didn't have then was all of this infrastructure established to leverage, to adopt and play with and experiment with and distribute a lot of these tools. And so that's where we're seeing already a lot of accelerated adoption and use. So this time horizon looks maybe, 10x the speed of some of what we're seeing, knock on wood, things don't hold it up too much. Now, that's why we're talking about kind of Web3 here. And as a previous discussion kind of pointed to, ledgers haven't, or how we manage kind of accounts and inventory hasn't really progressed very much in a very long time. So we moved the written ledger to a spreadsheet hosted in a cloud service. But that cloud service is still, as indicated, kind of centrally controlled from a trusted party, as kind of all these barriers to entry to offer these services, and also singular points of failure. So that if a system goes down or gets wiped, it's gone forever because there aren't copies outside of that, single ledger. And, things can get hacked, get changed with just, even conspiratorially, a few hands could be greased and something could be changed because they know somebody who works or know several people who work at an organization like this. And so I've indicated here, I think the oldest example of writing that we have archaeologically is this, as pictured, stone tablet or clay tablet from ancient Sumeria from 3200 BCE, which is a receipt for the sale of an oxen. So that's the first known piece of writing we have, is basically a receipt on a physical, somehow survived ledger. And what we're talking about with Web3 is, what if all of this writing, all of the examples of these things, all commercial receipts, had basically become what we call immutable, or impossible to destroy or erase or lose, because there are thousands, if not millions, of copies of it everywhere. And that's sort of the thesis of what Web3 is. And not only that's kind of what people mean by saying immutable, in that it can't be tarnished the same way gold is described, but also, censorship resistant, fraud resistant, because any change is, unless it matches the copy that everybody has who don't know each other, and that's too many palms degrees, it's going to be rejected as an entry, as an altered entry. And so only those that match at least 51% of the other records is going to be accepted as kind of a new entry. And that's very broad strokes, rapidly covering a little bit of the ground in the earlier discussion, the difference that we're talking about here. And then again, a brief timeline. Back in 2008, well, as early as 1991, actually, there was a paper by Stuart Haber and W. Scott Stornetta describing a cryptographically secured chain of blocks. So this isn't that new-fangled a genre of technology. So we've been talking about this for from 1991 to now. That's like about 30 years, nearly 31. But it wasn't until 2008 that pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto wrote a white paper that described an applicable turnkey model for actually doing something on top of that theory. And then a year later, the first blockchain was actually, published and made available. And then starting in 2014, co-founders of Ethereum first kind of coined the term Web3 or Web 3.0 as describing an internet that is truly decentralized, where you have an application system capable of kind of giving the control over what assets, what information, what pathways, etc., communities are available to the users in a bottom-up format. And since 2017, really, we started to see the kind of takeoff of NFT technology, though I'll cover briefly a little bit later on. Basically, around 2014, the first NFTs started to be developed and published around 2015. But this is kind of a brief history of how this technology was established. And kind of motivated, it's notable, 2008, in the white paper, it's attributed, the reason for creating this was as a reaction to the 2008 housing and financial crash. And it was kind of an effort to offer something that might render a lot of the financial movement and fragility of the system more moot, or closer to moot by creating money and insurance and incentive systems and oversight that would be a lot harder to fail so centrally and cataclysmically. So again, getting a little bit into understanding kind of what's involved in Web3 technology. And this is coming back, I promise, to understanding some of these broad strokes will hopefully really empower anyone looking at this space or interested in this space into being able to see like where the dots connect and how e-commerce can plug in and use these tools, and versus kind of just following Reddit hype, because you can see how these things all work together. So we talk about blockchain technologies and Web3 technologies in terms of layers, from layer 0 through layer 4. There are models that, stretch to 6 layers, and I'm sure we'll see a lot more in these still, even though, a decade in plus early days of this technology. So at the fundamental level, it's, description of basically value chains, how things can interact with one another that would, at a layer 2 or 3, be described in terms of, hard smart contract code. But layer 0 is kind of we establish how that information interacts. Layer 1 is implementation of that technology. So as an example, that would be the Ethereum network. Layer 2 is the technology that is applied on top of that to kind of expedite how a lot of apps can be built and function. And I'm sure anyone looking at the space has seen that that's a very huge problem to solve, is how stagnant the market is. And when you hear about gas fees being high, it's because everyone's kind of using the same road in order to execute their transactions. So creating these highways like Casper on the ETH network that create more scalability and efficiency without sacrificing, that immutability and all those other great features is what takes place at layer 2. Layer 3 is where you see the dApps like NBA Top Shot, Cheddar, CryptoKitties. It's where you see like specific applications that you might engage with, similar to Candy Crush or Facebook, or these applications that are recognizable brands with limited features. And then layer 4, we're only starting to see a little bit of development in, which are kind of the decentralized browsers. And as it's early days, these are things that you can start to look out for and understand where they fit into the puzzle of from fundamental tech to a specific app that you can utilize. So what does that look like in terms of, that's how Web3 works. What does that add to the picture of executing on e-commerce, or doing e-commerce in a new way, or adding features to what you're already doing? And for goods and services, these are things that can be smart contract secured. So that means essentially what a smart contract is where you, sorry, I was just checking the time to make sure I wasn't taking too much time on some of these details. But a smart contract is essentially everything in these networks is about moving away from having to trust that someone's going to execute on something and then going to small or large claims court as a recourse if they don't, to something that's automatically executed. You can see where the inventory is being kept. You have ownership over the thing, over and above kind of legal ownership or right to use a thing that you've purchased or sold. In that, you have these other unique access points that no one else has that allow you to do certain things, and then you can see transparently that nobody else can do those things. So that breeds a new layer of trust and a new level of access to a lot of markets that, especially in emerging markets, but really anywhere and in new industries and sectors where, and for single operating entrepreneurs that maybe haven't established their name yet, you can have people engage with you without having to see, getting to know you for 6 months, or because they don't know if they want to go through small claims court if things don't work out, or their legal system is heavily backlogged. That's why smart contracts matter, and that's why they're going to support business that never took place before, because of that trust barrier, that people want to engage more with Gap than, Schmap, this new brand, and they don't know if they're going to get what they just purchased, because they can see, where these things are kept and that they have access, etc. So again, inventory is kept on your spreadsheet, your Amazon S3 bucket, your content management system, whatever it is, using Web3 tools. That can be done in a way that there's no, or extremely unlikely probability, to the point that it's basically no chance of kind of losing your inventory, deleting things in a way that they can't be recovered, because there are other copies that exist outside of just your system of engagement. And similarly to, these names, descriptions, SKUs, images. These are things that you can own in a new way, over and above kind of legal ownership, in that you can use them in ways that nobody else can without, fear of losing access to those things. For the point of sale, we have, rather than you have more flexibility to use point of sale systems and deal in new currencies. That opens you up to new markets, new consumers, and wallets that have KYC systems, and payments that, if executed, the liability lies further away from people providing goods and services and onto kind of a network to correct, without that being kind of in-house expenditure to oversee and ensure gets delivered and arbitrated properly. With marketing, you have, this is actually kind of huge, and I'll touch on this on, I think, my last slide. I talk about some of the tools today you can use. By trustless targeting ads, promotions, and IP, I'm sure anyone who's dealt with a lot of digital advertising or has dealt with kind of digital ad fraud. So you'll see odd, unnatural spikes in visits from non-target users, from non-target geolocations, etc. And you're only using, one of the larger, ad services brands. And so it's hard to say that they're executing in a way that is exactly kind of a campaign that you've designed, but there's little to tell you about kind of whether click farms are being employed to drive up the cost of your campaigns for their own good, because there's kind of a black box on how these things are being executed, where tools like Lucidity, which is listed later on as an example, utilize these kind of transparent Web3 tools in order to show you exactly how these campaigns are being targeted, and giving you complete granular control over how those are going. And through research with Global 2000 CIOs and other technology executives, we've seen a huge uptick in adoption for tools like that over the last few years, for the reason that these are huge pain points and problems to solve. And then with trustless targeting for the user to put their mind at ease, as well as yours, in terms of the liability, some Web3 tools like federated learning protocols, and not to get too much into the tech jargon there, but you can see Google's published papers on this, and there are several other tools that have come out, allow for you to be able to target your users without ever personally looking at their raw data or storing their raw data, which creates a big liability as well for, GDPR adherence and anything else. Because if you've never seen the data and you're not housing it, then you can assure your customers you don't have the liability of if that data gets leaked, hacked, etc. But you still have the ability to target your users very minutely and very specifically by listing a level of, however you target them on geo, interests on other platforms, etc. And users can opt into these systems of, hey, I want to see these types of ads, or I'll allow this to be used in this way, or some kind of new kind of neuromorphic Apple chips and technology are making that kind of the baseline, where it's, a lot of implied opt-ins, and people are still being targeted, but their data is never being shared with anybody. It's just a protocol that's engaging with what their system is locally, and then sharing the learnings, but not the raw data from looking at that, and not attributing it to a specific user. But when the ad service is kind of shot out there, it's delivered to those that kind of fit that learning without, names or information attached anywhere. So that's kind of a big one in terms of scaling the e-commerce business in kind of the Web3 context, for both kind of consumer advocacy as well as, letting CIOs and general counsels rest at ease with how data is being used. Business processes. As we said, we have these business entities that operate in specific ways on kind of paper contracts. Now we have decentralized autonomous organizations and corporations that you can create, where the liability is more not just limited in a legal sense, but limited in a technical sense, where certain things can't be executed without, physically in a digital sense, going through each of the gates of how board seats are allocated, voted on, activities, information being leveraged. All of that is kind of technologically enforceable now with some of these new entity types and tools that we have, as well as kind of the systems for running your own business intelligence processes and management in a way that, similar to the marketing targeting your information, isn't being kind of shared and attributed to your organization. For staffs, you can have wallet-to-wallet engagements and smart contracts where you're allocating token on time bases, annual bases, or deliverable bases. And by creating kind of a system where token, like non-fungible tokens or NFTs, allow consumers to actually participate in the brand, and it incentivizes them naturally to increase the value of the brand and its assets. So now that brings us to the Z-axis, which is the metaverse. So how are we applying this Y-axis and this X-axis of Web 2 tools for conducting business for the immutability, trustlessness, the distribution of work and incentives that Web3 allows us in applying that into augmented experiences, expanded reality, however you want to put it, or as is kind of the new buzzword of the day, though not that new, the metaverse. So by not that new, similar to kind of the first description of a blockchain, essentially. Same year, 1991, the novel Snow Crash was published, which is the book that coined the term metaverse, which is, you can kind of see the description on the screen, but in short is pretty similar to the story of Ready Player One, which is also kind of the parallel being drawn to things like the announcement of Meta and the ever-present Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce to help commemorate that momentous day. And this has been kind of a 30-year path of taking this from concept to execution. Now, speaking specifically, and past the JPEG, as I'm saying, what is a non-fungible token? And I've left a hint here that it's not just, an ape avatar or, a 3D render that you can put on your Roku TV. Though those are artifacts of an NFT that you can access and have kind of own the media narrative for the most part. So in brief, it's a digital asset. It is provably unique. It can be leveraged to kind of reify the value of art, photos, music, video. Collectibles, we're seeing a ton of memorabilia. We see people trying to explore with creating like gifts from the Olympics as a moment you can own. A parallel to some of that is we already see content creators. Charlie Bit My Finger, YouTube video that is licensed, and that is kind of, they get paid every time that gets licensed properly. And when people just use it in social media, that's outside of that's within fair use. And so it's kind of similar to that use, but the valuations being put on these things are a bit hype and causing people to raise their eyebrows a bit. But these artifacts and this kind of creating a stronger enforcement mechanism in the NFT for these artifacts is certainly valid. So basically what this technology allows you to do is to timestamp and kind of locate exactly where and to whom something was issued, whether that's a good purchased or the digital asset or a service purchased or an event attended, whatever the thing that you want to mark is, the NFT is an artifact of that being true. So it's authenticated and timestamped, and you can add augmented abilities on top of that initial engagement. And I'll get into kind of what that looks like a bit. And then in brief, kind of covering what the extreme interest has been of late and how we're seeing this explosion of growth. I'm sure I don't have to go too deep into making the case that that's happening. But again, this deck is going to be available at NF.Tienda, so feel free to explore some of those metrics. Okay, what is happening now with the how this stuff is being employed in e-commerce and in kind of brand engagement already? I took us a few screenshots, even just today, where we're seeing Sony Music is getting in the game. DraftKings and the NFL are creating kind of NFTs. Luxury fashion, we're seeing engagement. And only today or yesterday, we saw Ubisoft, a huge games publisher, propose an idea to create kind of all of the digital assets, the skins, the toys, the perks in their games as NFTs themselves. But they did it in such a way that, as you can see, there was major backlash to how they rolled it out and what they rolled out. And Ascribe.io was a platform that in a former life, my startup partnered with in order to create NFTs for creatives and artists working in 2 and 3D mediums, and to find and trace and secure their artwork as it proliferated the internet. They were acquired by Coinbase, and the founders went off to create the Ocean Protocol. But even as far back as 2015, we saw platforms for this, though far ahead of their time. And over here, I have kind of a rolling slideshow GIF of some of the brands already engaging with non-fungible token technology. From Budweiser, as we can see, we saw that authenticated bottles of wine were being put out by Modavi, American Eagle, State Farm. We can see all of these brands engaging in diverse ways on leveraging this technology. And again, this is going to be available so you can dive into those specific use cases. To cover kind of in broad strokes what you can do with them today is you can create counterproof single-use promotions. So if someone has issued a unique discount code, you don't have to manually expire that thing or manage it in a way where kind of things can easily slip through the cracks. You have a technology underlying that attaches to a specific user at a specific time and takes care of itself by leveraging these smart contracts. You can create new types of loyalty programs, cause marketing, fundraising, incentivized testimonials that have to be kind of verified, similar to the rules with testimonials generally. New access to IP and music rights, and kind of decentralizing access to a lot of these things, tracking provenance for, luxury goods, from selling your sneaker to its journey through StockX to secondary markets, etc. People can always validate and track where that's been, who's been a buyer, adding or at least validating its current value. And yeah, we can again, this is going to be available. I know I have to wrap up my time here. But a lot of this kind of goes towards gamifying experiences, engagements, incentivizing your consumers, your staff, creators, your vendors to all participate in generating value and engaging in a way that they don't have to go through a lot of kind of trusted gates with long backlogs and kind of stodgy methods for making a lot of these things happen a lot more seamlessly and scalably. Now, what does that look like applying kind of the metaverse to that same thing? We're looking at expansive experiences, natural world positioning and overlay of inventory, where you can kind of explore these things in real space through augmented experiences IRL or augmented experiences in your browser, depending on your key in leveraging things like NFTs. You can have conversational and implied purchases and usage-based purchases with microtransactions, so people can engage with specific micro amounts of what you're selling, or bundled pricing, but also can opt into when they indicate something that means a purchase, and they don't have to go through the 5-8 step high friction checkout experiences. And then you can create by leveraging these incentive systems, you can create like MMORPG type experiences for both engaging with your staff and community in similar ways, and vendors, where everyone is kind of applying these goods and services to their reality in an augmented meta, context. Now, I'll just cover briefly how you can start engaging with some of these tools. I like a lot of these, for goods and services, NFTs, OpenSea, you can mint an NFT for free. Publishing and creating and buying them obviously comes with a cost. Using tools like MetaMask, you can more easily, start engaging with these things yourself and getting a handle on them. You can keep inventory in an immutable way as an alternate to Amazon Web3 services on IPFS. Marketing Lucidity was the tool about eliminating digital ad fraud. Business processes, you can create a DAO or a DAC using a very simple and user-friendly system like MakerDAO. Quidly is an example of creating action-based or kind of agreement-based or time-based token allocation as a replacement for equity, which gives you a lot more freedom to reward, again, co-founders, staff, consumers and vendors alike for engaging with what you're doing. And Tribe.so is a new community management system for creating these incentive promotions and the like. And again, you can find all of that at nf.tienda. So that's it on my end, I believe.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for your speech. So there is a comment. Your vision of the commerce in the tech universe and position of virtual and physical is inspiring. Thank you. Yeah.
It's great to hear.
Yeah.
We love to inspire.
So how do you think, will it be possible for NFTs and Metaverse in future to maybe ruin the real economy?
For doing what to the economy?
To ruin it or to replace the real economy.
So I don't know how many people have seen the movie Speed, but starring Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. But there's an example in there that I always used to like. Myself, I got involved in blockchain and radical decentralization and a lot of the technology that follows off of that ethos. Similar to a lot of people getting into the space as kind of an aftermath of witnessing the financial crash. And, what I indicated earlier about creating a more resilient economy instead of this kind of fragile monolith. It's the same thing that's happening in enterprise tech everywhere, is we're going from the monolith model to the microservice model. And that's like a perfect parallel for decentralization or distributed ledger technology and a lot of these systems generally, is you create so many systems of engagement that there's no critical system error point where it all can come crashing down because it's all been built on kind of one owned playground or just a few owned playgrounds. So the example in the movie Speed is there's a point where they start looping the security tape. So the guy watching them and making the speed bus scary and dangerous won't clued into the fact that they've pulled another speed bus or another bus up next to it, and, put a board down so all the passengers can exit and get off the dangerous bus before this one inevitably explodes. And as we're seeing with kind of the inflation hitting the USD and a lot of other markets, and with the housing industry starting to collapse in China, we're being able to offload, the innocent bystanders and citizens into these distributed economies and distributed systems, so that a few people's bad decision making, whether that's at the Federal Reserve or at Evergrande, I think is the real estate company in China, that everyone doesn't have to get hit completely, getting wiped out by that, because they've been able to put their eggs in distributed baskets. So that's the optimistic view. Now there is a lot of ruination happening with opportunists kind of using the buzzwords and the glow of this space to kind of trick them into very centralized, Ponzi schemes and switch and bait systems and bait and switch. And that's where, I've published a few pieces of like, here's an easy guide to doing super brief due diligence so that what you're dealing with to help emptor's caveat to help buyers beware in more accessible ways without having to study cryptography in order to know whether you're being scammed and losing your wealth or not.
Yeah. So there is a great example with the Speed movie. It's one of my favorite movie from my childhood.
Parallel economy.
Yes,
so,
yes.
Getting off the dangerous one.
Yes. So thank you much, Elizabeth, for your today's information. I think we will meet on our next events.
I think this too.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I look forward to seeing the rest of the content. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Have a nice day.